did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again. And he stopped me. Again, the Spirit asked me a question. What's a slave? Well, we'd think, well, that's kind of silly. We all know what a slave is. But I thought about it, and so I answered out loud. A slave is someone who has no rights. He has nothing of his own. He's property. He has to do exactly what the master says, no matter what. He may get punished or even killed. A slave is someone to be used and can be abused. I listened to see if I answered correctly. And instead I heard, you are not a slave. I will never use you or treat you that way. Well, when God talks to me, I usually sit there with my mouth open, trying to comprehend what he's trying to tell me, but I know that something important is happening. And he prompted me to keep going. So I read more. But you have received the spirit of adoption or sonship. And by the Spirit we cry, Abba, Father. I had been in enough church services to know that Abba meant daddy. And when I read Abba, Father, I felt like something hit me in the chest. The impact took my breath away, literally. It took my breath away, and I began to wail. I had never heard myself cry like that before, ever. All I know is I sat there crying with such force that my stomach hurt. Daddy had come to get me. And I knew I was welcomed back. I was the prodigal who had fallen into the Abba's arms. And I felt him rejoicing over the fact that I was free to love him back. Condemnation's a thing of the past for me now. Sure, Satan tries to play the game, but the foothold's not there anymore. He can't climb anymore. Another intimacy inhibitor that I lived with for years and years was an invisible cage. It's funny that you mentioned Ralph Cramden today, because I thought my dad was Jackie Gleason. I thought he was Ralph Cramden of the Honeymooners. No, really. He had dark hair. He was big and domineering, extrovert who did everything loud. He coughed loud. He laughed loud. He yelled at us loud. He yelled at the sports programs loud. He was just loud. My relationship with my dad was one of awe because I thought he was the strongest and smartest man in the world. But it was of fear, you know. He was really a loud guy. I was a quiet little girl. I was also overlooked, not maliciously, but I was overlooked as a little girl. My sister was the squeaky wheel. She was the one always getting into trouble. I was the quiet little girl. I was the good girl. The quiet little girls don't get noticed as much. And when I did muster up the courage to talk to my dad, I would usually be dismissed. I would be having strong feelings, and he'd say, "No, don't feel that way." So my feelings weren't important, I thought. I was like a crate-trained puppy. I would go in that cage when my dad was lecturing me or being loud or something like that. And when I was wallowing in that condemnation, I stayed in that cage all the time. Well, now the cage door is not only opened, there is no door. And now, when I go in there, he coaxes me out from time to time, but I don't live there anymore. Excuse me. We all have intimacy inhibitors. We're humans. We're not perfect at intimacy. We're just not. whether it be the fear of abuse, the fear of abandonment, not knowing how to relate to an invisible God. That's kind of a stumbling block for some. The feeling that God is for old people. The fear of the light that God might expose in our hearts because we're afraid of what he might find and say to us. And the fear of letting God have control. That's not an extensive list, but that's just a few that I could think of. But the thing is, God has no intimacy inhibitors. He is wide open for anybody who wants to call on his Son and come in. So if relationship connection with God is not happening for some of us, it may be an intimacy inhibitor. Or it may be you haven't even started your relationship with God yet. And we can't forget the outside influences. You know, the enemy, our enemy, you know, God, closeness with his kids is at the top of his list, so where is Satan's priority going to be? The top of his list is going to put a wedge between him and God, us and God. And he will work on us too. Any kind of meaningful relationship that's important to God, of course he's going to work on that. And from what I can tell, is Satan's primary tactic is planting seeds of doubt about God's character and who he is. I know we've heard this before, but it's always good to be reminded because he uses implications. He implies things. He will imply that God's love is based on how good we are, or God's trustworthiness is, it's shaky. Or God's mercy and grace, they're really not free. And God's forgiveness, it's not complete. He will imply that God is strict and stingy and selfish. And when our prayers aren't immediately answered, he will imply that God doesn't care or that he's not pleased with you enough to answer your prayers. He's not going to come in full, frontal attack, usually. He will come in somewhere on the sides, flank us somehow. And there's one other one I really wanted to bring to light. And I don't know why this was a big thing for me, but God is not boring. That's one thing that Satan implies, that God is boring. Boring, really? I mean, come on. God made us experiential creatures. He wants us to experience things, especially him. We just have to know his word and to stay within what he considers fun. But God is fun. He invented fun. The truth is that relationship with God, when I have been connected with him, it is pure enjoyment. It is wholesome and pleasurable. It's wonderful. Well, look at his creation. Enjoying what God has created points us directly to him. He made us with senses of smell, of taste, of sight, of touch, of emotion. He created the Atlantic Ocean. We can hear the roar of the waves in our ears. We can feel the breeze in our hair, taste the salty spray on our tongues, and feel the warmth on our skin from the sun, and then look at the vast horizon in front of us. Yikes. Then the Canadian Rockies. I've seen these things. Our eyes are amazed at the immense beauty of those snow-capped peaks and the smell of pine in our nose and the shriek of an eagle in our ears. And I've tasted mountain rivers, the water, that pure cold water. How could a God who created this stuff be boring? Let's dispel it for good. He's not boring. He's fun. He's exciting. He's the one who invented the lake that we play in or we go fishing in. He's the one who made the soft bunny that we love to touch, and the slurpy kisses from our dogs, and the warm purr of our kitties. He created wholehearted belly laughs. with good humor, even some not so good humor. And we have tears that flow when we see the beauty that he shows us. And we feel the awe and the power of an African lion. And even the sweet, tender juiciness of a strawberry that we taste. We need to stop and realize this is the God that wants to know us. This is the God who wants us to know him. Well, when I'm in a meaningful relationship with my husband, and I need to be vigilant to protect it. Vigilance, a state of alertness, attentive, concern, and care. The best example of vigilance I can even think of is a mother with her children. We've been equated as mama bears. We are fiercely protective and attentive of our children. And we will fearlessly and willingly attack any who threaten our kids. Vigilance. I want the fierce vigilance of a mama bear to protect my relationship with Jesus. I allow myself to be careless. I allow Satan to lull me into passivity and indifference. I want to protect my lines of communication with him. Keep my heart open, especially now that I know how much it means to him. I want to fiercely protect my time that I've allotted for him and me, and not allow the phone call to butt in line. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we sometimes protect our line at the grocery store more fiercely than we protect our time with the Lord. But none of us are going to be perfect at this. We're going to be in and out of close relationship with God because we are the wanderers and he isn't. But there's grace. There's grace. There's mercy. You know? He knows I get tired. He knows I get discouraged. He knows I lose focus, and he knows my weaknesses. God is vigilant for us. He proved it to me. All those years that I was hiding and condemned, he was vigilant for me. God is the mama bear who fiercely watches over his relationship with his kids. And as I choose to stay connected to him, he will do what he promised. He will show me that he is connected to me. Remain in me, and I'll remain in you. Well, this year should be real interesting and not boring. And I think it's going to be a year where God solidifies our purpose with loving him first, because he first loved us. He created relationships. He knows how to do this. He knows how to teach us how to do this. Let's embrace his purpose, because he's really worth knowing.